A genre that seems to have fallen out of popularity in the AAA space is mecha combat games, where you pilot a giant machine and duke it out with enemies. Of course, there are still releases nowadays, but compare it to the output of the 6th generation and it's night and day. One series that was short-lived but well-regarded was a little series developed and published by KONAMI during some of their best years in terms of creative output. Castlevania, Metal Gear, and Silent Hill, just to name a few. Originally intended for the Dreamcast, it eventually moved over to the PlayStation 2, featuring acclaimed artists from Gundam and Metal Gear, as well as Metal Gear's lead creative as the producer. Interestingly, Metal Gear is forever tied to its legacy. It released in March 2001 and included a playable demo for Metal Gear Solid 2: Sons of Liberty, which was arguably the most anticipated title of that year. This helped boost sales, but despite being well received, the game didn't quite break out into mainstream appeal. Funny enough, when they released the HD collection in 2012, it included a demo for Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance, so the tradition continued. Anyway, enough beating around the bush. I'm here to talk about the 2001 science fiction mecha classic, Zone of the Enders. Zone of the Enders is a mix between a third-person shooter and a hack-and-slash. You control an orbital frame or mech known as Jehuti, which has both ranged and melee attacks. So this game's combat is kind of funky in a cool way. Being a giant mech, you have a lot of movement options. You use the upper face button to ascend and the lower face button to descend. You move the frame using the left stick, camera using the right. Left face button attacks, right face button does grabs in which you can punch the enemy. You can also hold the enemy indefinitely, and if the enemy is knocked into the environment, it will deal additional damage. You can boost whilst holding the right trigger, and right bumper guards, though heavy attacks can break through the guard, which applies to both you and the enemies. The controls are very smooth in this game. For example, you can move in any direction and move the camera, but if you want the camera to snap to your back, you just need to stop moving. When dashing, you can also perform a quick dodge up or down by pressing the corresponding face button. In terms of controls, this game hasn't aged a day. Controlling Jehuti is like a hot knife through butter. Your inputs are realized very well. Changing directions is responsive, and the control scheme is perfect in terms of giving you all the mechanics you need, whether you're in combat or traversing the environment. It works superbly. The combat itself is the main thing we're here for, however. Unlike a lot of other third-person shooters and hack-and-slashes, Zone of the Enders uses the X, Y, and Z axis for its gameplay, allowing fights to happen at any angle or altitude. You primarily engage enemies whilst in the air and dispatch them using your moveset. I already discussed grabs, which require you to be close to the enemy to perform, and the enemy can perform them on you too. Though they can be cancelled, think of them sort of like a hold in a fighting game. The way melee and range works is interesting. The type of attack you perform is determined by your distance to the enemy. When the lock-on is green, you perform long-range attacks, which includes this projectile laser, a stream of lasers if you attack whilst dashing, which is known as a dash attack. These are more accurate than the projectile lasers but have a much slower fire rate and require constant angle changes. The final attack is known as a burst attack. If you use the dash button without moving, you will charge an energy blast which does a lot of damage and can pierce an enemy's guard. When the lock-on is orange, you will perform melee attacks. This includes a 4-hit sword combo by using the attack button, which stunlocks the enemy whilst it's being performed. If you do the dash attack, then Jehuti will dash around to the enemy and do a double-handed slash, which does less damage than the 4-hit combo and doesn't stun the enemy for as long, but it is useful if you want to get in a quick swing or need to reposition yourself. Burst attack will make Jehuti do a 360-degree sword swing, which does an insane amount of damage and pierces the guard, but it is very risky to pull off. It is possible to do close range or long range attacks outside of the intended distance if you start the attack before entering that distance too. Which is awesome because if you position yourself and time it just right, you can take advantage of the moves the enemy wouldn't have access to. You also aren't locked into the 4-hit combo, you can cancel it at any time by using dash. And since guarding only guards from the front, it means that with good timing and use of Jehuti's movement, you can bypass the enemy's guard without having to use a burst attack. You can also bait them out of guards or into attack strings depending on your distance or orientation to them, so the game rewards mobility, positioning, and manipulation to win fights. Use Jehuti's movement right and you can completely checkmate an enemy. The dash attack also helps pace fights too, since the player can attack whilst retreating or repositioning, meaning that there's no stop and start moments in the fight or taking turns. Sometimes it's smart to use your altitude by flying just under the enemy so their attacks go over you and are left open, or fly over them so their attacks don't reach you. Also, your normal ranged attack will likely miss the enemy if you're going full speed left or right, so you can't just endlessly strafe around the target. It has limited range, but if you position yourself just right, you can deal a higher DPS than any other ranged move. Plus, in most cases, the player has to approach the enemy to initiate combat, which gives them a chance to see what they're up against. I do wish the game gave more options for engagement though. Whilst I have plenty of options during combat, pretty much every combat encounter starts out by me going over to the enemy, hitting lock on, or they notice me, and then we fight. There really aren't any situations where you can get the drop on enemies. Both of you start combat with each other at the same time. What this does mean is that the player can't really cheese attacks, but it does mean that fights start out very samey. Thankfully, there's a decent variety of enemy types with different movesets. The most common type are Raptors, which have a similar, although slightly different, moveset to Jehuti. Their ranged attacks are a bit limited and are easy to dodge, but up close they put up more of a fight. But their moveset sort of mirrors yours in a way, so it's pretty easy to grasp how they work. The Cyclops gives up ranged attacks for more power. It tries to close the gap and pummel you, and guards a lot of your attacks and can evade them. If you don't position or time yourself correctly, you can be massacred by them. The most effective way to deal with them is to get in close, but that also gives them the advantage, especially in a group battle. There's a risk-reward mentality to this game. The Mummy Head is all about offense and defense, but has very limited mobility. It can be attacked from range, but usually tries to counteract that, which puts you in harm's way of the lasers, especially if there's more than one. Group battles work well in the game, especially since there's multiple enemy types, and they begin to cover the weaknesses of each other. The Mummy Head's laser sight might be easy to avoid by itself, but what if there's two, or a Cyclops pursuing you whilst you try and go in for an attack? There might be multiple Raptors that are pressing you to move away. Their attacks are easy to avoid, but it means you have to time your burst attacks more effectively against asynchronous enemy attacks. This also means you have to decide which enemies pose the biggest threat in a battle, and whether or not you want to take down the weaker enemies first to make managing the harder enemies easier, or take them out so the weaker foes are left out in the open for an attack. A complaint I have is I wish the game used the level design in more interesting ways, because since the combat of this game pretty much always takes place in open areas, it means the levels are often just backdrops for the battles to occur in. There are some instances, such as the opening section in the hangar, the second city level, the mountain stage, or the two final boss arenas, but generally speaking, the player rarely interacts with the environment during battle. And it's a shame because in these instances, you can see how using the environment for cover or to gain a positioning advantage adds more depth to the combat. I also think the enemies really could have been made more aggressive and persistent. It's really easy to run away from fights in this game. All you have to do is keep the enemies off screen for a few seconds. The distance doesn't matter. As long as they are out of view, you're safe. So you could just run away, get health, and then come back. I understand having a flee system in case the player starts at a fight they don't want, or if they massively overestimate their abilities or underestimate the enemy's strength, but making it this easy means there's little consequence for the player doing poor. aside from a poor ranking at the end of the game. The game also gives additional weapons you can use, however, most of them are very situational at best. The Javelin's arc is very low, and as such the positioning required for it to work is too much considering how little damage it does compared to other attacks. Sniper does barely any damage and is basically only used for a story segment. Geyser is supposed to stun enemies, but it requires too much work and positioning for almost no payoff. Decoy is really only useful for one battle. Phalanx is decent for stun locking enemies. Halberd does good damage but locks you in place and has limited range, so you're just better off using a burst attack, in most cases. Gauntlet almost always guarantees a hit but does little damage. The only ones I can actually say are good are Comet and Bounder. Mummy is supposed to be a better shield, but there wasn't any situations where I needed it, and it's given so late in the game that there's no reason why you would use it. The boss fights are hit and miss too. Tempest is the first, and he forces you to back off in his first phase by shooting flames everywhere, so it's easy to just dash and attack him. In his second phase, he starts jumping into the air and crashing into the ground. The entire boss is just a pattern you repeat. There's no switching up attacks or strategies or anything. And unfortunately, this is the case for almost all the bosses. Tyrant just keeps shooting lasers at you which require decoy to dodge, and then in his second phase, you just change elevation and shoot him whilst he's open, rinse and repeat. Same for Nebula. This boss is really easy to bypass just by charging a burst attack and then spamming range. The only boss in the game that works well is Neith. Neith is a rival boss with abilities that mirror the players and as such takes advantage of the gameplay mechanics in a fast-paced 1v1 duel that constantly causes the player to reposition and switch up attacks because Neith hits hard and is very aggressive. Plus you fight Neith multiple times and the boss gets a different moveset on the third fight, which is pretty cool. I don't know how a game with a really solid combat system manages to have bad bosses. Structure-wise, the game is pretty standard. You move from zone to zone, clearing out enemies and obtaining items to progress. There are some sections where you backtrack and fight stronger enemies, and there's SOS missions in which you need to stop enemy frames from destroying structures and killing survivors, which switches up the gameplay as you have to position yourself in a way to avoid attacking the survivors by accident and make sure the enemy's attacks don't hit them either. It's not too frustrating since as long as you get to C rank or above, then you're fine. If you somehow manage to get all of them killed, then you get a game over right before the end of the game, which is funny.
Are you happy now?
I was just playing.
Similar to Metal Gear, there is a rank at the end of the game which grades you based on how many saves, continues, enemies routed, and time taken. So if you want to go for max rank, you should try and go for a 1 credit clear, which adds an arcadey type of replay value to the game. Unfortunately, there's no leaderboards, even in the HD collection. Thankfully though, the game is very replayable. All cutscenes and story sequences can be skipped, as well as the tutorial. As it always should be in games. Quick note, I dislike it when tutorials are forced on me. What if I'm playing the game a second time or on a new platform? I know how to play the game, I don't need to be told it. And what if I'm replaying for rank? I don't want to watch story sequences. Thankfully, Zone of the Enders avoids these problems. The game is pretty short at around 4 to 5 hours on an average playthrough, which I appreciate as the game is fairly well paced. It's pretty much non-stop action the whole way. It has a lot of gameplay density because of this, and it means looping through the game over and over works well. It's a short, very fun, and unique game that you will have a blast with from start to finish. With some games, there's sections where you think back and never want to go through that again. This game doesn't have that. It's a non-stop fun ride. As stated, the combat system has all of the qualities you'd want, with a fun moveset, movement system, enemy encounters, and multiple ways to play around with and manipulate the enemies and mechanics, and the structure of the game really does allow the mechanics to bloom. Despite some unremarkable bosses and some useless inclusions such as the level up system, which really does nothing, and some weapons are almost never helpful, Zone of the Enders has a very well designed and engaging gameplay loop that made it a very strong pillar of mech combat. After you beat the game, you unlock Versus Mode, which allows you to play as the different frames and have 1v1 battles in the different arenas in the game. It's a blast to try out different combinations of battles, and it includes two of my favorite tropes in video games, those being 1. A boss character becomes playable, and 2. A playable character becomes a boss. And the best part? You can play 2-player mode and battle it out with your friend. It's local only, so there's no online, but it's still a lot of fun. And there's cheat codes too, so you can unlock this without having to beat the main story. That being said, I wish there was more unlockables. I wish there was a survival mode where you fight waves of frames, or have new skins to unlock for Jehuti. Maybe even a new frame you can play through the game with. They could have added leaderboards and online play for the HD collection and more content, but as a way to experience the game, it's probably the best. Zone of the Enders has stellar gameplay, but I wish there was more modes which took advantage of it. The story is where this game goes downhill, in that it doesn't really have one. The basic premise is that you're playing as a kid named Leo on a space colony next to Jupiter in 2172, which is attacked by a military force known as Barem, as an attempt to retrieve two of the most powerful orbital frames in the colony. Leo comes into contact with one of the orbital frames, Jehuti, and pilots it. Leo was contacted by the people in charge of the colony to bring Jehuti to the other side, since the original intended pilots died in the attack. On the way, Leo finds his friend Salvis, and together they fight their way across this almost ring-like structure. Yeah, Halo, this game beat you to it. That's it for the majority of the game's runtime. You mostly just take out bosses and orbital frames from Barem as you get to the mountain. Leo and Salvis have a back and forth between the AI on Jehuti known as Ada, which is constantly confused by Leo's actions and not wanting to kill people.
I detect vital activity within the target. It appears that occupants are still alive. I am releasing the lock-on cursor. Target will be destroyed.
Destroy it? Why? They can't fight anymore.
Your question does not compute. Why not destroy it?
Why should I kill when there's no reason to?
I compute 17 clear reasons for such action. Most pressing is possibility of the target gaining access to another orbital frame and returning to battle at another time and place.
Shut up! I refuse to destroy it. What's the point of attacking those who have no intention of attacking us?
Do you wish me to state the reason?
Don't bother!
I have to conclude that your reaction is extremely illogical. Illogical actions by persons without sufficient capabilities make it very difficult to fulfill the mission.
You mean I'm not good enough to do this, so I should just shut up and obey orders?
That is the most sensible course.
So you say.
Over the course of the game, Ada grows with Leo's behavior and starts talking less like an AI.
Can we talk? If you do not mind.
No, I don't mind.
I have calculated the expected rate of crew survival for the present mission. In a best-case scenario, there is an 8.7% rate of survival.
I see.
You have asked for numerous transfers from your duties aboard Jehuti. You have also had many chances to do so. May I ask why you are still here?
Are you preaching to me again?
No, I am simply asking out of curiosity.
Well, I really don't know.
Based on past experience, I can offer several plausible reasons. 1. An overestimation of your fighting abilities based on an underestimation of the enemy's war potential. 2. Desire for a reward in proportion to the danger of exposure to self-destruction. 3. Emotional revenge for placing your crew's life in danger.
Maybe you're right. But I really don't know myself.
Whatever your reason, it is not logical. It is still possible for you to go back now. I do not want you to die.
Ada.
It's then revealed at the end that the plan is for Jehuti to go on a suicide mission, which Leo is clearly upset by. It's very underdeveloped. It's nothing you haven't seen before in a piece of AI-related science fiction, and the interactions between Leo and Ada get repetitive, as they mostly go over the same topics of Ada always thinking tactically, whilst Leo always thinking morally, and the talk they have near the end of the game is really the only time they properly have dialogue with one another. Selvice barely has a presence too, as she's pretty much just always in agreement with Leo, and therefore doesn't really add anything interesting in terms of ideological conflict, and pretty much only serves as deeper motivation for Leo to fight the villain Viola towards the end, since he initially wanted to be done with Jehuti. I guess she does encourage him to be more mindful of people on the Ark, in terms of survivors, and not blowing up the place, but that's about it. It's lazy motivation for a final battle, which could have happened anyway. Viola herself is pretty decent as a rival for Leo. You start the game in a boss fight with her before she's ordered to leave, and then you have 2 rematches with her at the end. She does have a bit of a downer of a backstory too.
I have lost everything. I survived many battles. I lost my parents and my lover. I don't have the functions of a woman now. Even then, I have continued to live. Right. To survive was the only purpose to life. To survive is my life. In battle, there's a slight gap between life and death. Those who were killing were themselves dead a moment later. I killed innocent children and even my comrades to save myself. Soaking in their blood and eating their flesh, I managed to live this long. It is not a matter of my luck. It was only my vibrant power that kept me alive.
She's fully aware that it's a kid piloting the mech she's fighting, but she doesn't care. She just wants to keep fighting until she dies in battle. Even then, it does just come off as a generic rivalry, so the game can have a cool boss, which is fine. I value the gameplay a lot more than the story, but I wish Leo and Viola interacted more. I think there's an interesting dynamic you can gain from a naive kid who's been thrown into this situation, who hasn't been desensitized to the horrors of war, put against somebody who has. But for the most part, it's just Leo beats Viola in combat but refuses to kill her, and then she hates him for it, until the end where she pretty much begs Leo not to save her. The other characters are mostly just exposition and don't play a big role, so I won't bother talking about them. What also doesn't help too is the English voice acting for the game flat out sucks. I can't speak for the Japanese version since I haven't played it, and unfortunately the HD collection does not allow for multiple language options, so maybe in that version the execution's better, but in English, wow, it's bad.
You're the runner of Bravo? That frame's not a kid's toy. Get out of there now!
I'm not a kid!
There's the proof that you still are a kid.
What?
I thought a woman would be plenty. Alright, I'm your target.
Characters speak in very uniform ways regardless of if it fits the situation. They have conversations like people who got high on drugs, barely understanding what the other person said. And as a whole, they are not very good at conveying any emotion without just going overboard to the point of overacting.
Jehuti will self-destruct?
By deliberately overactivating the generator, Jehuti will generate a maximum of 22.3 gigatons. That is equal to the power of 15 positron bombs.
Wait a minute! You mean you'll deliberately explode this frame? What about you?
All my functions aboard Jehuti will cease.
So it's a suicide mission?
I think Viola is the only character to have a decent voice actress, with John Mazzai. It's not as well presented as something like Metal Gear, for example, but her direction and performance sells me better than any of the other characters.
You embarrassed me this time, so look forward to the next time. See you again, boy.
I don't know why Metal Gear was the only Konami series at the time to have good voice acting, but God bless Chris Zimmerman, I guess. Now, on the same day this game released, an OVA named Zone of the Enders 2167 Idolo, a prequel set 5 years before the main game, released. It goes into more detail on the development of the orbital frames, Viola, and the divide between people born on Earth and Mars. It does help a lot to flesh out the world of Zone of the Enders, and it is beautifully animated. Then again, they got Sunrise Animation to do it, the studio behind Gundam, Cowboy Bebop, City Hunter, and more. So you get top-notch detail and animation. If you were disappointed by the lack of story in the game, I would recommend this. Speaking of which, I love the art direction for the game. You have a lot of legendary artists working on the character designs, the mechs, and the environment, and it all looks sleek and futuristic, but still believable. For example, a lot of the places you go through on the colony look like normal places you would find on Earth, just with more advanced technology. Power plants still look like power plants. Towns and cities look like how you would expect, just with more developed structures. Car parks look the same, as do churches, dams, overpasses, and so forth. People still drive cars and have houses that look like average middle-class houses, just spruced up a bit. You can even tell which areas are more developed economically. My favorite section is the second city level, which has these high skyscrapers with lights pouring into the sky, and many roads as you go down vertically. The orbital frames themselves look good with distinct shapes and padding in certain areas, but with a humanoid shape to still give it character. And I like that the enemies are designed in a way to show off what type of unit they are. The raptors have a skeleton-like appearance because they're brittle and can be taken down easily, mostly acting as cannon fodder. The mummy heads have a big shield protecting their front, with their legs barely being visible, showing that they're more about standing their ground than mobility. The Cyclops are also very top-heavy as they get in and punch you. This also helps create distinct silhouettes, so you can immediately tell who you're fighting. Even the stance of the orbital frames adds character, like how Jehuti has a more upfront and masculine stance and proportions compared to Neith, which is more feminine, which makes sense considering who's piloting them. One thing I always found funny about this game is that the cockpit for the frames is located on the crotch, which Yoji Shinkawa included as a joke. Now, I've heard some people say that this actually makes sense because that would be the center of gravity on the orbital frame, and therefore you wouldn't get thrown around as much. But it does look funny, especially when it's in flight mode. I like the little details too, such as when your health is low, the lines that pulsate through Jehuti change color, almost like blood traveling through veins. And I love the color scheme too, being a mix of blue, green, and silver, with occasional uses of orange or purple. The art direction as a whole is top-notch, and despite being a game from 2001, it's still a very visually appealing game. Sadly, apart from all that, Zone of the Enders has an interesting world that is poorly conveyed and told to the player, with bad translation and voice acting and uninteresting characters. The soundtrack of Zone of the Enders is mostly made up of early 2000s techno and electronic tracks, which is something I am a very big fan of. Plus it fits the futuristic mecha setting, and it is very groovy. The game also features atmospheric tracks whilst not in combat, which consist of quiet hums that break out into more intense tracks when you engage in combat. This makes for tense moments when you're outside of combat or trying to maneuver around without being seen. It's hard to describe why, but the low render distance has always given me an unnerving atmosphere when combined with these tracks. What is nice too is that the music is unique for each stage, and so you get a good variety of tracks. One of my personal favorites is Neith's boss theme, which sounds like an alarm blaring, almost as if it's a warning of danger. Otherwise, I like the theme that plays when flying high above the colony. It has the groovy feeling of the combat tracks without the tension, as you're nowhere near combat and can just enjoy flying around. The VR theme during training has a sort of drowned out sound, which makes the training sort of detached and have a dreamlike feel to it compared to the rest of the game. The more emotional tracks during cutscenes can be very cheesy and over the top for the emotions they're trying to convey, but it certainly does more work for than the voice direction does. The main menu track always sends shivers down my spine every time I boot up the main menu. It's both creepy and oddly beautiful. Quick note, I like how simple and effective the main menu is at conveying the tone and atmosphere of the game whilst being UI friendly. It doesn't show too much. The cool thing too is that the main menu theme is a section of the closing theme, Flowing Destiny, but reversed. Of course, though, I can't mention this game's soundtrack without talking about Kiss Me Sunlights by Heart of Air. It's a lovely track with a hopeful yet melancholy mood, sung in a mix of Japanese and English. The soundtrack overall is very, very good. It fits the world of the game, has a variety of tracks for different moods, is implemented in a way to fit the atmosphere and enhance it, and it's just fun to listen to. Despite mostly selling because of the MGS2 demo, Zone of the Enders was well received, mostly facing criticism for the short length, which I don't think is a problem, and its poor translation, which is a problem. It's a very strong entry into the mecha genre with tight controls and fast-paced gameplay, combined with great art direction and a fantastic soundtrack. Plus there's the versus mode after you're done. If you're a fan of mechs, third-person shooters, or hack-and-slash games, I would recommend it. The problem is that there's no PC version of the game. The HD collection is backwards compatible on Xbox One and beyond, which is how I got footage. The PS2 version works well on emulators, so there's that. You could also try the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 versions for emulators too and see if that works better. I think it should get a full re-release on PC. The second game did, with full VR support. What about the first game? Zone of the Enders is a classic that should be experienced by any fan of the genre.
She